Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, a series that I've really been enjoying reading so far. And when I read the second book, Words of Radiance, I immediately thought that it outdid Way of Kings, which is a feat that I did not see coming, as I loved Way of Kings. As I started Oathbringer, I thought, could he do it again? Could he continue to get better with each and every book? There were some of my favorite moments in the whole series in Oathbringer, but as a whole, did it outdo Words of Radiance and Way of Kings? Maybe I'll figure that out by the time I get done talking about that here. Since these books are a massive undertaking to read, I'm going to organize this by each character. Right off the bat, I want to say I did really enjoy reading this book. This is what my paperback copy looks like. If the spine of a paperback looks like this for me, some of you may be disgusted, even triggered by this image right here. Feel free to click away if you are. But if it looks like this for me, it means I enjoyed the book. I was very comfy, reading it, doing a lot of, prepare yourself, sending it all over the place. This is a good sign. So in the grand scheme of things, I really enjoyed this one. Part of the reason I really enjoyed it was because of all the new information we found out about, especially considering two of my favorite characters being Dalinar, this is definitely like a Dalinar book here. We've sort of come to understand each installment in the Stormlight Archive to this point being sort of deep dives on each of our at least three main characters, with Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. Way of Kings, definitely Kaladin. Words of Radiance, definitely Shallan, who I found liking more than anybody after the last book, but after this book, I think Dalinar has reclaimed my favorite character, because I think this is just an awesome installment from Sanderson, especially in regards to finding out more about Dalinar, his past, why he is the way he is, why he's struggling so much at this point in time. In regards to Kaladin, I don't think his trajectory as a character really changes all that much with this. I feel like he's pretty consistent with his moodiness, definitely still moody boy at the beginning of this, and finally, like, self-admittedly on his part, he is a moody boy, but his return to his home, to his family, is extremely satisfying, especially when he puts some people in their place, rightfully so, as this Radiant, and he reveals himself as that finally, and I really enjoyed that return. So that was one of my big likes with this, as well as his sort of mission to be intentionally captured with the Parshmen, and sort of his ability to empathize with others, to sympathize with other groups, especially those who are marginalized, definitely oppressed. Definitely shows during this part where he's with the Parshmen and he finds himself being sort of pulled in multiple directions because of his past as a bridgeman. He can sort of immediately place himself back in the shoes of those who are being oppressed and marginalized, but at the same time, like, they are deemed the enemy. So that sort of internal conflict while he is with the Parshmen, he sees how easily influenced they are, not really able to defend themselves, while there's this sort of impending doom, a really sort of satisfying turmoil, I guess you can call it. I thought the whole realization that he was responsible in some part for conceived slaying of her brother, I thought that would amount to more. Shallan realizing that Kaladin had a lot to do with that, I thought there would be like conflict immediately and some definite tension, but it seemed to be resolved and almost ignored as they travel to Kholinar together with Elhokar for the sort of like reclamation project of Elhokar's wife. And that sort of inner turmoil is my favorite thing about Kaladin. We definitely have a lot of exposure in terms of every character's inner turmoil, especially with Shallan in this book, which can be annoying at some points. No offense to Shallan, but it can be a lot at times, and Dalinar is like the definition of inner turmoil. But I feel like Kaladin's can be a lot at points where he's like, I just don't know the right thing to do, but for the most part, it is warranted, it does make sense, and it usually resolves in a satisfying way. So his desire, especially when they're in Shadesmar, to get back and protect Dalinar, sort of rousing himself out of these extended stupors that he'll find himself in, really like the way Kaladin's character has moved, and his ability to sort of move past things. He seems the most willing to get past the conflicts he finds himself a part of, especially at the end with Adolin and Shallan. He's like, okay, I recognize this thing, I'm gonna keep it pushing. And I really appreciate that about Kaladin. Sort of moving on to Dalinar, he is definitely the biggest focus, and it works really well. According to like everything I've heard about the Stormlight Archive in general, this is meant to be a 10-book series series in each of the 5 books. So the first 5 books and the last 5 books are sort of like their own broad arcs as a whole. So the thought that this is book 3, this is sort of like that bridge book between the first 2 and the last 2, the same way like the second book in a trilogy would be. I think it still does really well, especially with the amount of advancement we get in the way of Dalinar's character. And I like the amount that, as a reader, your faith in Dalinar, your love for Dalinar is sort of put on trial, especially considering all the terrible things he was doing as he was growing up, when he was establishing his sort of war-torn reputation as this Blackthorn. I love that. I love taking characters that you cherish so much and just humanizing them to the point where they're being villainized at points, and it really tests whether or not you're gonna feel great about them and trust them in certain situations. Dalinar has a very satisfying arc, not only with the past that is revealed within his character, but also the present, where in the past we see him struggling with the thrill, which the amount of time Sanderson said he was overtaken by the thrill. It's just, but I get it considering where Dalinar is coming from, the lengths that it took him, like almost wanting to kill his own brother. Like, clearly he had an issue, and then he meets Evie and things start to change as he tries to become more of a family man, but like everything about his character both resists that and sort of organically avoids it until he can't really avoid it anymore, and we find out that he inadvertently burns down a massive section of this area during a battle, an onslaught, but ends up taking out his wife in the process, which is extremely sad. And all of a sudden we realize why his memories are being wiped. So Dalinar is definitely the most moving, most emotional character in my opinion. I think that's why I like him so much. He is probably, I don't know, Shallan's all over the place, so to call him the least static of all the characters, I feel like his state fluctuates the most. Again, maybe he's tied with Shallan in that aspect, but I find him the most interesting out of all the characters. Especially the whole bondsmith thing was so satisfying at the end as he created this perpendicularity, and I'm eager to see what those sort of bondsmith powers look like in the future books. His ability to just bring people together, whether it's lift in these sort of like dream states, these memories that he's sort of going through, running through like a Matrix-esque simulation. I love how she sort of pokes fun at him and continues to be difficult after her sort of introduction in one of the interludes in Words of Radiance and the further sort of exploration of her character in Edge Dancer. I really like Lift. I want her to be involved more, especially the dynamic between her and Dalinar. I find funny, endearing, and yeah, the conflicts that Dalinar faces just seem to be on, I don't know if I'd say a much greater scale, but like a higher scale. Like the tangle with Odium, conversations he has with the Stormfather, they just seem bigger. He seems like a more moving, influential character than these others at this point, and I just really enjoy just the amount of weight that it feels like the book carries whenever Dalinar is making a big decision or is part of a chapter or whatever it might be. And then we have Shallan, who I think at this point, after really liking her in Words of Radiance, has reached like the highest level of annoyance for me, and that's nothing against her character, really. It's just all the like puns and the wordplay and her humor. I know it's all a coping mechanism, and everything about her like 75% of the time she is displaying a coping mechanism for all the trauma she's gone through, whether it was, you know, killing both her parents when she was younger, or it's things going on in the present time, her shifting back and forth between Radiant, her personality as Shallan, and her personality as Vale. Like she is all over the place, and I cringe a lot when Shallan is on the page in Oathbringer, and I didn't want it to go that direction because I know how other people feel about Shallan and find her humor very cringy, which I do as well, and she's just written in an interesting way that I haven't fully reckoned with yet. So I'm interested to see, considering, you know, she's on the cover of Oathbringer, she's on the cover of Rhythm of War. Sanderson has talked about how she's like another tier above these other Radiant characters. So I personally want to get back to a place where her personality is redeemed for me. That's awesome as she light weaves all of these soldiers to battle. Her powers are awesome. It's just, there's just something about her that irks me. So I really want that to be redeemed. Adolin, one of the most jarring incidents in Words of Radiance was him taking out Sadeas. Like, complete and utter lack of self-control there, and it seems like he kind of gets off scot-free. I know a huge part of this is like Shallan working with the Ghostbloods and Shallan and him investigating the murder, even though he's responsible for it. Like, it seems like that isn't addressed again until the very end, after it's a big part, the investigation in the beginning. And Dalinar's like, you really shouldn't have done that. He's like, yeah, well, nobody liked him. Shallan, of course, she chooses Adolin, interested to see where their relationship goes after Adolin refuses the crown. Of course, Jasnah takes the crown. She's now the queen, and I love seeing where that goes because she seems extremely powerful. You know, they recognize that she has shard plate. Love seeing what she can do out there on the battlefield, the way she deals with all these sort of diplomatic situations, juxtaposing the way she deals with them between her and Dalinar. I really like Jasnah. Definitely the character I want to see explored the most in the future besides Hoid Wit. His appearances here, it seems like his influence is starting to really be included, come into the fold a bit more, whether it's the metal siding, the things that prevent people from being discovered in Kholinar, or every time this sort of end piece to every book, he's always the last thing we see. And his role seems to be integral. We find him finding this spren at the end here as he's sort of like ambling through the city, speaking the first ideal of a Radiant at the end. Like, I need more of him. Other things I'm looking forward to the most in the future is this whole Taravangian thing. Like, he is playing Dalinar like a fiddle during these books. He has sent assassins to Dalinar, sent assassins to Gavilar. He is pretty much all over the place, especially with the revelation that he was touched by cultivation, or the Night Watcher. Everything to do with the Night Watcher and cultivation. Very interested in all of that. Interested to see what Jasnah looks like as a monarch at this point. Interested to see where things go considering Elhokar's death and sort of like going to get his son at the end. Is there going to be some sort of like Luke Skywalker situation, or like Paul Muad'Dib with his son? Like, is there going to be a situation where Elhokar's son is all of a sudden very powerful? And I wouldn't be surprised if he's powerful, because it seems like the rate at which Radiants are just sort of popping up and coming to the fold, it's a lot. It's a lot more. Again, I've talked about it before. I thought the whole Radiant thing was going to be a very exclusive club to get into, but it seems like people are just getting powers like crazy. Anytime these bridgemen are around Kaladin, they all of a sudden have power. Like, how many Radiants is the whole new race of humanity in this just going to be a bunch of Radiants? Things I liked about this book. I liked the deep dive into all of the character history and the lore in this book. I felt like there was more clarity around that in terms of sort of the hierarchy between like humans, Radiants, heralds, gods, the spren, all the different roles that they play. I like the lore behind the heralds and the desolations. And I feel like if you have read Way of Kings and Words of Radiance and you feel like you're still in the dark a little bit and you don't like being in the dark that much when it comes to a series like this, Oathbringer is a nice sort of checkpoint book to get to, because it will sort of bring in a lot more clarity. And I don't have a ton of dislikes because, again, in the grand scheme of books I have read, I really like Oathbringer, and it is an amazing fantasy novel. My biggest issue with it is just sort of like the nature of the way these books are plotted. It's clear that Sanderson, whether you've watched like his sample classes from his creative writing course at BYU, or the way he talks about just like storytelling in general, he is a plotter. He outlines these books so thoroughly. So there's oftentimes recognition of, okay, all of this is purposeful, but it can feel like so much, and the pacing can feel incredibly inconsistent when it feels like this lead up is taking so long. And then all of a sudden, in the span of 25 to 50 pages, so much will happen. It'll be sort of like one of the many cruxes of this story that so much will be leading up to, and then it will sort of die back down and be another massive lead up to another point. And you can tell that that's the way that he plots his books, because there are certain checkpoints that are extremely important, whether it's for the characters or for advancing the plot or for revealing something about one of them. You can just sort of like feel that recognition of the pacing and the lead ups to these very important points, which for me is fine, but it's a lot more evident in Oathbringer. And those sort of lead ups can feel like they are dragging, and you have faith that Sanderson is leading you somewhere because you're just sort of aware of the nature of these beasts of books. But in a 1300 page book, like, that can really feel like a lot, especially in this case when so much happens over the course of like the last last 100 pages. Like 85% of this book is just a lot of lead up, and it feels like, yes, things are happening, but not all that consequential compared to what the magnitude of events are in the last 100 pages. If I were to rank the first 3 books, it would be Words of Radiance, Way of Kings, Oathbringer. But I think Oathbringer has the highest of highs. Is this the best or worst book in the Stormlight archive so far? It feels wrong to call any of them the worst, because they are, in, again, the grand scheme of things, so good. In terms of the stars I give these on whether it's like Storygraph or Goodreads, these are all 5-star reads for me. So it's like comparing the greatest. So it can feel like you're sort of trashing one of these books when in reality, these are some of my favorite fantasy books I've ever read. So my likes far outweighed my dislikes. Loving this series so far. Let me know what you think of it down below. Other than that, that's all I got. So talk to you next time. Peace.